Creating a vision. Let's talk why visions matter and how leaders can effectively communicate them to followers. Keep in mind, we're not just talking about grand company vision statements. Visions matter with smaller groups. Visions help motivate people toward a goal. In this chapter and this section of the course, I want you to understand the difference between a vision and a mission and a vision's characteristics. You should understand the role mental models or schemas play in communicating visions, and that'll help with communicating anything, sense making, and how to do it. You won't see sense making in the book. That's something really important that I'm adding to this. And finally, you need to know all the skills involved in communication and implementing a vision. Before we dive into the details of visions, let's talk about another related concept, missions. However, we do know while there's a difference between mission and vision statements, in practice, sometimes people use the terms interchangeably. The book explains that a vision is a mental model of an ideal future state created by a leader or a team. A guiding statement pointing to where a person, group, organization is going. It's the why, or the organization's inspiration. Conversely, a mission is more like the what and the how. It's more of a purpose statement or even a mandate of what the organization does and broadly how to achieve the vision. As researchers James Kouzes and Barry Posner says, quote, "There's nothing more demoralizing than when a leader who cannot clearly articulate why we are doing what we're doing," unquote. Visioning is the inspiration or the why for a team. A leader wants to communicate a good vision frequently and consistently. A good vision provides a purpose for followers and the leader and makes them more committed to that goal. Plus, research shows that followers are more productive and make more ethical decisions when they follow a worthy goal. When we talk about visions, it's important to understand their characteristics. The book covers these 5 really well. So a vision is literally a vision. It's a picture of the future. It can be a change in a new direction. It reflects an organization's values. It serves as a map, and it can be a challenge statement where you're challenging people to commit to or do something really worthwhile. Let's get practical here and look at some actual visions and missions from companies. IKEA's vision is to create a better everyday life for many people. Adding on to this is on their website, they specify that those people include the customers, co-workers. They don't say employees, they use community-based language saying co-workers, and they extend that vision to the people who work at their suppliers too. It's one of the things they're known for. They talk about their vision going beyond their products and even into the community. Let's contrast vision with mission. So here IKEA more concretely explains how the company will achieve their vision by offering a wide range of well-designed functional home furnishing products at low prices so people can afford them. And what they explain is that means they're looking to make well-designed functional furnishings. I mean, it really is that straightforward. Next, let's look at Tesla. Their vision is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Note the word choice there, accelerate. So they're pulling on that car language. But also notice that this vision is broader than cars. It's about energy. It doesn't even mention cars. Its vision is a loftier goal with a tie to a sustainable goal. It's smart, allows the company for it to move beyond just cars and tackle other energy areas without having to completely reorganize. The mission right now, much narrower. Vision is the why, mission is the how currently. Tesla's plan to achieve their vision is by focusing more on being the most compelling car company of the 21st century and driving, there's another car pun, the world's transition to electric vehicles. So I think it's a really good example of how visions can be big picture, missions are going to be specific, and a well-written vision might be really big. In fact, a well-written vision will often be a challenge. The vision needs to be long-term and future-oriented. You need to be forward-thinking. Second, the vision should be motivating. A challenge with visioning is this idea of an entrenched mental model because they can inhibit leaders' abilities to see new possibilities in their company or their industry. But wait, what's this mental model stuff I'm just mentioning? This is so critical here. I'm going to guess you're going to take this out of this class and into your personal life as well. This is huge with communication. So not only are entrenched mental models an issue for leaders, but the definition of a vision is, quote, a mental model of an ideal future state, unquote. In communication and psychology, you might hear mental models described as schemas. A mental model or a schema is a mental structure that helps us organize and eventually interpret information, explanations of how things work. They help us group together information and take in new information. Schemas influence what we pay attention to. We can learn information quickly if it fits into a pre-existing schema. And if it doesn't fit, sometimes people will just reject it altogether. The mental models are usually deeply ingrained in people and impact how we process information, communicate, and even behave. People use these schemas automatically to process information and determine how to react to it. Now, this is an example that I sometimes give in the first BCOM course, and now we're going to go way beyond it. But the first BCOM course, I use this example that there's a child. All she's ever known in terms of a farm animals is a horse. And then she sees a cow for the first time and says, hey, it's a horse, right? That's because the idea of a cow fits into her mental schema. It's a horse, lives on a farm, 4 legs, big, eats grass. But maybe the child starts to realize, well, there's some differences, and quickly she learns you can't really effectively I wouldn't recommend putting a saddle on a cow and riding it, and it's not very convenient to milk a horse. I also do not recommend that. So then this child, or maybe even somebody who's not seen a lot of farm animals, will start to have a new organization here, a separate schema for cow, and the horse schema that she had is now being modified to include new information based on her experiences. Our experiences, education, culture, television, the media, so much influences our schemas. And because of that, people hold different schemas. For instance, with police officers, sort of a personal example here since my husband works in law enforcement, but some people definitely hold the schema of feeling unsafe due to experiences with racial profiling, or some police officers viewing citizens who they work for as guilty until proven innocent. Conversely, there's other people who are going to have a really positive view of law enforcement where they hold the schema of police protect people. They feel safe around them. And I'll just tell you, my mental model there is that we have all different kinds of police officers, some who are really great and some who aren't, and some who need more training, which is, you can see, like, my schemas then are much more complex than average because of my experiences, education, culture, and so on. These differences in mental models impact our behaviors, our emotions, our communication. I know somebody who, or maybe this is even you, where they see a police car and they tense up. And that's not necessarily how I'd react. I might see, let's say if I was near where my husband worked, a police car, and be like, ooh, who is it? That's a huge difference. And that's going to change for the speed of processing information, for stereotyping, and so much more. Mental models and schemas allow us to process information quickly into categories. They're important. They impact things like how we attribute causes to things. It can be useful. It's going to help you make shortcuts. We cannot process everything in a full way. We need to have a way to narrow down our vast information in our environment. We love shortcuts because we're cognitive misers. We don't want to spend a lot of mental energy organizing information, but that can end up being really dangerous. Being unwilling to change your mental model or your schema can lead to poor visioning, poor leadership in general. We need to not just block out new information, distort it, or wrestle with it. So suppose a leader has an entrenched mental model. It might be they're blocking out information about, this came up for me, what makes for a good slide. And if you came of age when PowerPoint, this is before, I know many people listening to this were even born, but if you came of age at a certain time, you have an idea for what makes a good PowerPoint slide. And now we have new research about how the brain works. And so if you're entrenched in this idea that a good PowerPoint slide is a series of bullet points and a bad PowerPoint slide is what you're looking at, then this is going to be weird for you. On the flip side of that, if you're up to date with current research about slide design and you understand your audience is maybe watching this on YouTube on their phone, then you understand this slide works. So that trickles down. That trickles into decision making about communication. It trickles into more communication theories and also your visioning. So let's say maybe even with the PowerPoint thing, you are thinking, well, gosh, I love a 12 bullet point slide with no pictures. I don't think anybody in here would. But how do you change that mental model? That's through a process called sense-making. Sense-making is a crucial communication theory when it comes to leadership. In fact, the MIT Leadership Center teaches sense-making along with visioning as two of the 4 key competencies of a leader. Sense-making is the process of creating a new mental model of schema. It is literally the making sense of or meaning of the unknown. It's answering questions like, what's going on there? It's the process of making sense in the context of where you're operating, getting your fingers on the pulse. It's this precursor to, really good visioning. This can be internal sense-making, so what's going on with yourself? It can be with the people you work with. Why did so-and-so get fired? The organization. Why are we losing employees to our competitors? Or what's going on externally, politically, culturally, economically? What are trends for the future? How does the pandemic impact our present, our future, or our past? You can even see with, let's say, the pandemic example that your audiences are going to have different perspectives based on when they were alive here in a few years and what the pandemic even meant to them. Sense-making is most often needed when there's a disruption, so a business model no longer working, new technology, global pandemic. The process is figuring out about what is going on and how to react. And that's hard when we don't necessarily know what's going on. So in sense-making, you're asking questions. What's the story here? Now what do I do? Sense-making is making sense of the unknown so we can take action and adjust if needed. Sense-making allows leaders to understand more clearly what's going on because it is adjusting the mental model. Therefore, sense-making often facilitates what other leadership activities like visioning. If you're still confused, here's a hypothetical scenario. So let's say you work for a company not doing so well financially. You show up for work this morning, your coworkers discover Nancy's desk is empty, nameplate's gone. Nancy had been there for years and was really hardworking. So you and your coworkers begin discussing the situation. Pause there. That process of you discussing the situation is going to involve sense-making. Together you're asking, what's going on? What's the story? How does this impact us? Probably, is it our jobs? What's happening? So let's continue with the scenario. You and your coworkers decide to ask your supervisor about Nancy. Your supervisor replies, she doesn't work here. This is all the information you're giving. Now what? So you're pause here and discuss it. So the supervisor wasn't helpful, all right? Your sense-making process, you and your coworkers are still trying to get more information to understand what happened. When you asked your supervisor, you asked her to sense give. That's when a person sense makes and shares the story or the mental model with others. Your supervisor was ambiguous. Didn't help you sense make what happened. That might be because she didn't tell you because of privacy reasons or she didn't want to. Fast forward to lunch. You still don't know what happened to Nancy. However, Lynn, who you work with, joins you. He has a close relationship with your supervisor. Lynn sits down at the end of lunch and comments, well, issue of missing money from the cash drawer is resolved now. So what happened? How do you make sense of this situation? We'll pause. You have the information. So you can add to your mental model and piece together Nancy got fired for stealing from the cash drawer. That's probably different from what you were thinking 2 slides ago. It's a small example of the sense-making process. You deal with something unknown. You try to figure out what the story is. Now think about sense-making on a broader level. There's a lot of moving parts with that beyond just why Nancy got fired. This leads us to the classic sense-making analogy Brian Arthur developed in 1996. He used a casino analogy to give an example of how sense-making is needed when there's uncertainty. So imagine you're, milling about in a large casino with the top figures of high tech. Over at one table is a game starting called multimedia. At another one is a game called web services. There's a lot of tables. So you sit at one. How much to play, you ask. 3 billion, the person replies. Who will be playing, you ask. We don't know until they show up, he replies. What are the rules? These will emerge as the game unfolds, he tells you. What are the odds of winning, you wonder? We can't say, responds the house. Do you still want to play? Well, that's a lot of uncertainty, right? But that is what businesses deal with. We don't know the future. A good sense maker can figure out what's going on, in this case, the nature of the game and the rules as they're playing it. But there's a whole lot that you're not going to know. So when good leaders make sense of things, it leads to higher ratings of leadership and communication effectiveness. In other words, good leaders are good sense makers. People use sense making to figure out what's going on and to determine what they can do to be effective. And through sense giving, the process where leaders intentionally try to influence people's interpretations or sense making, and then they communicate that to followers. This is kind of like mapping out an unfamiliar situation to lessen how much you don't know. That map gives you something to act on in case of a disruption. So as you progress, you can adjust it as you gain more information. I think a great example of this is H.E.B., where they had plans in place based off of things that happened 10 years ago on how to react to something like a pandemic. Most grocery stores didn't have anything like that, and it's part of why they were able to be successful, and not just financial success, but successful in terms of the community's perception of them and the happiness of their employees, which absolutely is going to have a long-term impact on their overall success. So as you move forward, you can adjust your map, you can adjust your mental model, but the initial act of sense making from the unknown or making that first map gives our followers and us something to concentrate on. Well, let's go back to that tech example in the casino. Sometimes in business, you have no choice but to move ahead with an incomplete or even an incorrect map. Maybe you know your competitors, maybe you don't. Just remember though, first, this allows you to start moving and take action when you might feel paralyzed, trying to find the best map. Second, it helps people calm down and get a sense of the situation. Third, in a rapidly changing situation, speed can be more important than accuracy. You can always update that map or mental model as you get more information. So how do you sense make then? 3 steps. First, you're going to explore the wider system by seeking out many types of data and different sources. For a lot of leaders, that means time talking to people, employees, clients, other leaders, consultants, and stakeholders when forming a vision. And I'll even talk bluntly, when we were redesigning all of the BCOM program, I spent a lot of time talking to students, to faculty, to administration, reading through all of the exit surveys for references to BCOM, going through course evaluations, and talking to faculty and people outside of our institution. I did a ton of research on what BCOM programs look like all over the country. It was a lot. And of that, as the program director, I then had to sense make. So studying the organization's history, studying the present, and looking most importantly to the future for what long-term changes, and that can be in the industry or even with communication, socially, politically, environmentally, need to be understood so that we can make progress. Think about how you would do this if you were trying to sense make about a department issue where you're already working, for those of you who work. You'd look for information to form a clearer picture about what's going on. You'd involve others. You try to make sense of the situation, and this would help test and improve your schema by getting other perspectives. You create a map next of that current situation. This is step 2. That would involve trying to form a mental model of all this information, decide what people need to know, maybe what people don't need to know, try to see the issue from multiple angles and perspectives. If reaching a conclusion feels really easy, it might be that you're falling back into your pre-established schemas or your pre-existing mental model. That's when change doesn't happen. This should be when you start thinking about how to sense give the information to your org. So providing a vision if you're sense making on a global, larger scale. This process would involve thinking about how to use images, metaphors, stories to capture key elements of the situation. And like I mentioned before, deciding what don't they need to know, what's not going to help them move forward. I've been trying to do that a little bit as I explain this concept to you. So we'll rewind, so take a meta look here. I told you about the Nancy firing. I gave you the casino analogy. I started talking about the concept of maps. All of that was, the goal was to make the process easier to understand. If you can communicate something memorable like the Nancy story, it's going to help people who are listening sense, give, and understand that vision much better. Third step in creating the vision is to act. Do it, right? To change the system, to learn more about it, test it so you can learn from it, take an action if it doesn't seem to be the right move, course correct, learn from that, keep going. I know you aren't probably going to be creating big visions soon, but it's helpful to be conscious of how you're sense making now and how you can make sure you're forming good mental models with a lot of flexibility. That means gathering information, articulating what's going on, testing your assumptions, being ready to change them. Good leaders are good sense makers because they can process through a lot of information, are adaptable, constantly checking their mental models. In fact, I'd encourage you to start asking yourself questions like, what's the story here? Now what do I do? Why won't or why will this work when you're sense making even about your daily life? All right, so a leadership team engaged in sense making and has a good idea of what to do regarding the uncertainty they're facing, what now? They need to try to influence people's interpretations or sense make. They need to sense give, or in this case, give the vision. We know mental models and schemas are difficult to change, and when new information is introduced into these models that might not fit, say, change a leader's trying to make for an organization, people will be resistant to these changes to the models, especially if they don't have a clear understanding of why the change is needed, or perhaps they don't trust the person trying to change it. As a leader, providing a mental model or schema is you giving people a way to view or see the actions you are taking for the team or organization and see the end goal in mind. If you don't give them the mental model or help them reframe their current schema, it's more difficult for them to understand what they are working toward. So visioning often involves changing or providing a new mental model. That's huge. So let's conclude then and talk about what you do next. So you've sense made, you've figured out a vision. Let's talk finally about communicating and implementing that vision. Researchers James Collin and Jerry Porras explain, quote, organizations with a well-articulated vision that permeates the company are most likely to prosper and have long-term successes, unquote. Visionary companies are often market leaders in their industry. Remember, a leader isn't just about your position or power. At any level, you can practice visioning and communicate those visions to others. To communicate that vision, adapt to your audience. We know people don't like change. You want to figure out how to communicate your vision without overwhelming people. Figure out what they're comfortable with. Give them that information. Start to nudge them more toward the broader vision. Don't give your followers whiplash by introducing too much change quickly. I guess unless you have to, which it does happen. But if that does happen, here's a way you can counter it. Highlight the values, and do this always, but a good vision is going to excite and energize people. People are willing to join worthwhile projects or feel a sense of purpose. So think about how you can emphasize values in the vision. That could be talking about improving conditions for others, allowing for growth or development of followers. A shared vision helps people find that meaning, like being part of a team or providing a worthwhile service or product. Third, a vision is going to involve uplifting words and symbols. I'm going to pause here. So culturally specific, so be very careful, and be very careful too with certain practices that are going to lean into some cliches. So for example, sports. You want to make sure you know your audience and what's going to work for them. Fourth, visions include inclusive language. We are. This language facilitates the sense of teamwork and cohesion. Whatever you do, please do not default back to singular he or just talk about me, myself, and I. And finally, and this one is starred because it isn't in your book, there's a leadership scholar, John Cotter, and what he says is that an effective vision is specific enough to provide real guidance to people, but vague enough to encourage initiative and remain relevant under a variety of conditions. You aren't setting up metrics here. You're providing a vision. So if you think back to Tesla, that's why it's not just cars. If vision's too specific, it could leave followers adrift once they reach their goal. And then what? Another example, in the 1960s, President Kennedy set the goal of getting to the moon by the end of the decade. NASA did it. And then what, right? So they didn't have that really clear vision for their next goal, and it's part of the reason some scholars think that it left a lot of confusion for the organization in the 1970s and in the 1980s. All right, so we're almost to the end here, and this is what I want to conclude with. Implementing a vision requires a great deal of effort by a leader over an extended period. Not only does a leader communicate the vision, they need to act it out to build credibility. That's why I mentioned earlier, well, what do you do if they don't trust you? So for instance, if a leader says the vision is to have the best customer service, then doing behaviors like asking for customer feedback and implementing changes, that matters. Second, a leader should set performance expectations to guide implementing the vision. Most people want to do a good job. A shared commitment to excellence sets a performance measure and helps followers know what the expectation is and how to operate in the organization. Third, keep your eye on the goal or the vision and remind people of the larger picture and what they're doing. Work towards that goal. And fourth, a leader should work and share work and empower people. I mentioned that sense-making often doesn't happen alone. A vision shouldn't either. Trust me, you don't want to work with somebody who is the sole owner of the vision. The vision should really be a collaborative process that helps to empower everyone within the organization. So in conclusion, remember when it comes to sense-making and visioning, these skills are used in a broad corporate company, huge level, but on small levels too. We are always engaging in sense-making, trying to figure out what's going on and being aware of that process and making sure we're taking in information and not clinging to entrenched models is really essential. With visioning, with understanding the characteristics of a vision, with knowing the difference between a vision and a mission, with understanding how people get stuck in their mental model, mental ruts is probably a better way to put it. All of that, with understood, can help us improve organizational behavior and, as I mentioned earlier, just how successful we can be even at a core level of small teams. This is the process of giving people and yourself that motivating why purpose and communicating that to others to help to encourage action.